Chapter 11. Passage of time. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. Damage calculated at 0%, sleep mode deactivated. Red Vine Peak had undergone some significant changes since Ashlock last saw it. The familiar purple grass courtyard was replaced with smooth gray stone of the highest quality engraved with a shimmering silver metal gleaming under the summer rays. A dense stream of chaotic chi danced around Ashlock as if he was the center of a grand whirlpool. The world's energy felt revitalizing, like a jacuzzi. Ashlock relished the pleasant feeling. Ashlock was oblivious to this world's common sense, but there was no way such a sizable runic formation was easy or cheap to build. Did Stella build all of this so I would heal faster? Ashlock inspected his body and confirmed the earlier system message was accurate. He was fully healed and looked better than ever. The charred bark was gone, and the evidence of such an incident was lost with time. Only he and maybe Stella, if she became an immortal, would remember what happened. Ashlock hummed to himself as he looked at his branches. They were practically dripping in various types of fruit. Some had clearly been plucked recently, as there were glaring gaps in a few fruit clusters. Perhaps Stella has been feasting on them. Ashlock glanced around and failed to spot the girl. Maybe she went out. A breeze blew by, rustling Ashlock's scarlet leaves, and it was only now in the stifling silence that Ashlock realized he was terribly lonely without Stella. Letting out a sigh, Ashlock decided to busy himself to pass the time. I should catch up on what's changed while I was sleeping. Status: Demonic Spirit Sapling, Age 7, Chi Realm. 7th Stage, Skills, 7 years old. When Ashlock had fallen asleep, he had barely been halfway through the 5th year of his life. A part of him winced at the thought that a year and a half had seemingly vanished. Those were days he could never get back. But there was another startling point. He had gone up a stage in the Chi realm and was now at the 7th stage. Cultivating in my sleep seems a bit ridiculous. It made Ashlock think of all those people back on Earth that preached the importance of a side hustle that generated passive income. Isn't everything about being a tree passive? I have very little control over anything. Ashlock had successfully made himself sad again, so he looked at his skills to see if anything had changed. Eye of the Tree God, A. Deep Roots, A. BL.net, Language of the World, B. Chi Fruit Production, C. Devour, C. Hibernate, C. Lightning Chi Resistance, C. Lightning Chi Protection, B. Fire Resistance, D. Fire Chi Resistance, C. Basic Poison Resistance, F. Basic Meditation, F. Ashlock paused for a while and read over his skills. They were mostly the same except for a new piece of UI that he had never seen before. My skills can upgrade. Once again, Ashlock wanted to smack himself for not thinking it was possible. His previous shock came from learning a skill outside of the sign that IN rewards. So it was only natural he could upgrade his skills as well. However, what caused an upgrade was now a question gnawing at Ashlock's mind. Let's think. The two skills that upgraded were resistance skills, if my memories serve me correctly. I was struck at least 9 times by lightning strikes during that storm almost 2 years ago. Those lightning strikes were Chi-enhanced, likely due to the chaotic weather. So, Lightning Chi Resistance, A, C, grade skill, upgraded to Lightning Chi Protection, a supposed, B, grade skill while I slept. Ashlock mulled over the difference in naming. His previous dismissal nature to the power of his skills had been cast away, and now if a skill was at the C grade or higher, he took them seriously. What is the difference between resistance and protection? As that was the only clue left for him by the system, Ashlock thought long and hard. Resistance means not being as affected by something. Whereas protection outright stops the threat from ever doing any harm. So in terms of lightning, resistance should mean I would still get damaged by lightning, just not as much. Meanwhile, protection would be like a shield. Ashlock scrutinized the clear blue sky and silently begged the heavens to test him again with their vicious lightning. I have been an evil tree. Strike me down if you dare. Ashlock hollered at the mighty heavens while waving a metaphorical fist like a grumpy old man. A bird landed happily on his branch where it had made a nest and fed a gray slug-like creature to its awaiting children. Ashlock sighed. It was hard to give off evil tree vibes when a stupid bird could use his branches as free real estate. At least pay to stay here with shiny coins or something. Ashlock grumbled to himself. Right, back to the skills, I keep getting sidetracked. Ashlock peeked back at the list, and there was one last skill upgrade. Fire resistance, D. Fire chi resistance, C. Well, this one is a little easier to figure out. The D grade skill clearly offers resistance to standard flames, whereas fire chi resistance will give me resistance to fire powered by chi rather than flames fueled by oxygen. It was interesting that the world considered them two separate things, and it would appear chi-based attacks are in a league of their own above standard elemental attacks. Anything else to check up on? Ashlock did plan to check his sign.in system, but first, he wanted to confirm everything else. How about down below? It had been about a year and a half, surely he had made some progress through the mountain. Ashlock struggled to hold back his shock as he felt down below. His roots spread for thousands of meters, and he was around halfway down the mountain at this point. Oh my God! Look at all these mineral deposits. Ashlock still did not know the true name for the silvery metal that seemed to power the runic formation, but the mountain was abundant with the stuff. Ashlock painstakingly counted over 100 such deposits spread throughout the mountain. To his relief, it seemed his roots had learned from the previous experience and were latched around each mineral deposit. Never underestimate the versatility and genius of an A-grade skill. As deep roots was one of his two A-grade skills, it was naturally a source of pride for Ashlock. Sadly, the mineral deposits only help me dig deeper rather than improve my own cultivation. Ashlock thought back to deep roots' abilities. It allowed him to dig deeper and make tunnels. However, he hadn't tried the tunnel-making feature due to his low chi reserves and only discovering one mineral deposit. But now, with so much ambient chi surrounding him due to the runic formation and the many mineral deposits scattered throughout the mountain, he should be able to use that feature. Well, here goes nothing. Metaphorically closing his eyes, Ashlock willed the deep roots skill to work its magic. Ashlock felt the ground tremble as the roots bulged outward, causing the rock to crack in protest. This doesn't seem very stable. Ashlock's thoughts were rendered useless as he watched his now slightly hollowed roots open up and consume the loose rock, and then, like a very slow conveyor belt, the pebbles were carried within the roots. But where can the stone go? Ashlock traced the direction the rock was heading in his mind. It wasn't upward or downward. Rather it was sideways. Does the skill plan to dispel the rock out the side of the mountain? With anything tree-related, Ashlock would likely know the answer in a few days. If not months. Unfortunately, the rock being carried by the viscous sap within the roots seemed about as motivated to move as he was to stay awake, which was to say, not very motivated at all. Reminds me of public transport, so bloody slow. Ashlock chuckled at his memories from Earth before regaining his focus. Anything else to check up on? Ashlock used his Eye of the Tree God to scout out the pavilion for anything interesting. Oh look! The koi fish in the pond have had children, and they seem rather large already. To Ashlock, no time had passed at all. One moment, he closed his eyes with half his body scorched and ruined, and the next time he awoke to a fully healed body. The rapid passage of time was jarring and hard to ground in reality, but little things like seeing baby fish in the pond let Ashlock comprehend the passing of time. Other than the new fish, some plants were added to the exotic garden, and some had grown slightly more mature. Good to see my fellow plants are doing well. His roots were so expansive at this point that they ran below the entire pavilion, meaning some of his ambient chi seemed to be helping all the plants in the courtyards bloom. Despite the pavilion's immense size, as usual, it was desolate of people. It was like an abandoned site that would soon succumb to nature, but a few traces of footsteps amongst the dust suggested some recent activity. Ashlock checked around the entire mountain, including the steps, and even peeked into the misty fog of the neighboring peak, but alas, there was no sign of Stella. Since there was nothing else to do, Ashlock summoned his system. Alright, time to sign in. Idle Tree Daily Sign .in System Day. 2774 Daily Credit. 766 Sacrifice Credit. 0, Sign in. Wow. Ashlock was aware that a lot of time had passed, but seeing it in numerical form really hammered in the fact that over 700 days had passed. Now the question is, should I save up or spend now? Ashlock sat there for a few hours, mulling over the decision. As a tree, he had patience and time on his side. There was no threat breathing down the back of his neck demanding he spend right away. So he should wait, right? The door to the pavilion swung open. Its creaking door broke Ashlock from his thoughts as a familiar but somewhat different face entered. That is almost freaky. The girl in Ashlock's mind didn't match up with the young lady. When he had last seen Stella, she was a 13-year-old girl who reminded him of a scared kitten, but she was now almost 15 and walked with far more purpose and pride than before. Puberty was no joke as she had changed considerably in such a short time. Stella was a little taller, had sharper features, and the demeanor of a scared child was long gone. Her black cloak, which had seemed a little baggy and odd for a child to wear, now fit her form perfectly as she strolled into the courtyard. As she got closer while subconsciously twirling the black wooden-handled daggers in her hands, her face was a cold mask, almost unrecognizable. Ashlock groaned, has she become one of those ice-cold beauties I heard so much about? Sadly it seemed to be the case as the girl that had once been so bubbly and full of life coldly appraised the courtyard, meticulously checking every runic stone underfoot as she walked. It wasn't until she was a few steps from Ashlock that her head snapped upwards, and her eyes went wide. The cold facade vanished, and Ashlock once again saw the vulnerable child with an odd obsession with a tree return. Tree. She practically threw herself forward and placed both palms on Ashlock's freshly healed trunk. You took far too long to heal, so I built this runic formation for you. Hee hee. She nervously stepped back and rubbed her cheek as she surveyed the courtyard. Hope you don't mind. I did have to destroy the rather scenic courtyard to make space for it, but it should be worth it. Ashlock found the sudden change in her demeanor around him rather amusing, maybe even a little endearing. Glad to see she is doing well. When Ashlock had seen the cold look on her face a moment ago, he was worried the lack of his presence had sent her down a dark path. So Tree. How have you been? Feeling better? Stella leaned forward and patted his trunk, her blonde hair fell forward, revealing the red leaf earrings he had gifted her all those years ago. Oh boy, do I have a story to tell you. The young woman collapsed onto the bench, which Ashlock noticed had been upgraded to a lovely hand-crafted oak bench. Stella went to open her mouth, so noisy. Ashlock grumbled and skillfully dropped a large fruit on her head, causing the girl to yelp. What was that for? Stella shook her fist at the tree in a playful manner and giggled while biting into the fruit. Emichum, yummy. Oh, speaking of food. I went hunting this year and have some snacks for you. A ring on Stella's hand flashed with chi, and suddenly the entire courtyard was filled high with monster corpses of every type imaginable, and Ashlock could barely hold back the sudden surge of hunger. It was time to feast. Chapter 12. A Pact with the Devil. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Stella lay back on the oak bench like a slothful empress as she snacked on the plentiful fruit dropping from Ashlock's branches. She had an idle hand resting on Ashlock's trunk as she felt the chaotic chi rampaging throughout the tree's giant body. It was fascinating to witness. Some mystical force she couldn't understand was micromanaging the chaotic chi by condensing it into fruit or pushing it down into the tree's roots. To Stella's surprise, the tree did not push back on her invasive chi like last time. Instead, it welcomed her like a guest, making her feel warm. So bringing you snacks is the way to win you over. What a glutton. With a light chuckle, Stella pushed her hair behind her ear and smiled as she surveyed the courtyard. Black vines covered in tiny thorns had sprung up through the gaps in the runic formation and mummified as many of the corpses as possible. The stench of blood wafted through the air, but Stella didn't mind. Instead, she laid back peacefully, closed her eyes, and quietly hummed to herself as she enjoyed the summer breeze. This is so much easier than last time. Ashlock hummed to himself as he let the system take care of the chaotic chi. With the inclusion of his vast root network, he could shove endless amounts of chi down into the mountain. Although it felt rather wasteful, he had no other way to store the chi anyway due to his low cultivation, so he might as well speed up the progress of his mountain delving project. A week passed, and Stella lounged on the bench for most of it. These cultivators are a completely different breed of human than those from Earth. If Ashlock had been reborn in a park back on Earth, the humans would stay for an hour or two at most before having to attend to something. But in a cultivator world, the pursuit of strength required patience, discipline, and meditation. All of which could be achieved under the canopy of a friendly tree. By now, the courtyard was nearly empty of corpses. Only a pile of bones and a blood-stained runic formation remained. Sensing his calming chi, Stella's eyes fluttered open, and as she stretched her back, she yawned, "Had your fill, tree? How was it?" "Good question," Ashlock said to himself as he summoned his sign that IN system to check. Idle tree daily sign that IN system day. 2781 daily credit. 773 sacrifice credit. 1827, sign in. Holy shit. That is 5 years worth of credits. Ashlock's leaves rustled and swayed as he got excited. 1,000 credits got me A.grade skills. But I have 2,600 now. Ashlock quickly calmed down and got serious. Should he draw? What if the requirement for a skill higher than an A grade was 3,000 points? Or 10,000? The words were at the tip of his non-existent tongue. He wanted to say them so badly. Fuck it. Sign in. Sign in successful, 2,600 credits consumed, unlocked an S.grade summon. World Walker, summon. World Walker. Ashlock's mind blanked. I can summon things. Since when? Summon. World Walker. Yes/no, Ashlock didn't hesitate and pressed yes. Stella stepped back from the demonic tree with a concerned look. The chi surrounding the tree had suddenly become chaotic like a raging storm, bolts of high-charged chi like lightning flashed out, and the tree glowed with power. Stella looked up, above its scarlet leaves. A crack in reality appeared. It was a single black line without depth, shadow, or light. Something simply impossible. Purple flames sprung to life across Stella's shoulders and arms, lightning crackled between her fingers with uncontrollable fury. She activated her earrings, an artifact she had learned to control over the years. Her eyes became swirling abysses, anything that gazed at them would feel uncontrollable terror. She wanted to be prepared for what was coming. The black line opened. An eye without a pupil, easily 3 trees tall, glimpsed through the gap in reality. It shifted, scrutinizing everything with alien curiosity. Ashlock was baffled. What on earth was going on? He could only watch in absolute horror at what was occurring. In moments like these, Ashlock realized the system was not to be trifled with. His branches suddenly began to grow rapidly upward, toward the rift in reality, like a hand of spindly fingers reaching for the stars. The branches elongated but withered as they approached the alien eye that gazed on in amusement. Summon failed. Cultivation deemed too low. What? Ashlock roared in his mind as the branches cracked and flaked away in the presence of the rift. No. My credits. Ashlock watched in horror as the tower of cards came crashing down and years' worth of effort crumbled before his eyes. The rift began to close, the eye lazily moving away, leaving only a hazy vision of the demonic land beyond. But a small figure, a mere dot of white compared to the gargantuan crack in reality, sprang through before the rift sealed and its immense pressure vanished. The creature landed gracefully on Ashlock's largest branch and curiously looked around. It was a squirrel. The most mythical one Ashlock had ever seen. Its snow-white fur was like silk against Ashlock's bark, and its golden honey eyes gleamed with intelligence as it examined around and crossed its arms in a suspiciously human manner. Wishes to form a pact. What? A pact? There was no way in hell Ashlock was signing a devil's contract with a mythical squirrel that had just emerged from another realm where a creature with an eye the size of a skyscraper lurked. The information flooded Ashlock's mind. A pact was a partnership where the mutual parties agreed to coexist peacefully. It differed significantly from a summon as it didn't involve mind control. Can I change the conditions? Ashlock wanted to include Stella in the pact. Life without her company would be too painful at this point. The squirrel received the altered pact and looked down at Stella. The young woman had clearly not noticed the squirrel, as she had deactivated her purple flames and glared at where the rift had closed with a distraught expression. Ashlock then saw the squirrel materialize on Stella's shoulder, scaring the ever-living shit out of her. What? Ashlock looked back at his branch, and sure enough, the squirrel had vanished. How did it do that? He hadn't felt any chi fluctuations, and the coverage of his immediate surroundings was perfect. Stella glared at the creature and was frozen in shock as the squirrel poked her cheek with its small finger. Stella still had her earrings of absolute fear equipped and active, yet the squirrel's golden eyes looked straight into Stella's without flinching. Then, the squirrel reached up and poked Stella again, this time on the nose, causing her to yelp. Stop it. What are you? Stella pushed the squirrel's finger away with her own. However, the squirrel didn't resist Stella's touch and instead held the tip of her finger in its tiny hand. It then pulled Stella's finger closer, pressed its head forward into Stella's palm, allowing the startled girl to give it a head massage. Stella's expression went from shock to utter adoration in seconds. Oh my, aren't you the most precious thing ever? Stella exclaimed, and the squirrel's desire for head rubs grew, so it forcefully gripped the side of Stella's hand and moved her hand up and down, its eyes closed in apparent bliss. Ashlock watched the scene and felt a little left out. He wanted to give the demonic realm jumping squirrel a pat on the head too. Stella giggled as she played with the squirrel's fluffy tail swooshing in the summer breeze. Then, as she stared into the squirrel's curious golden eyes, she said with a smile, "Little guy, I think I will call you Maple. How about it?" The squirrel gave Stella a thumbs up, much to her shock, before vanishing into thin air. Maple has accepted the pact. Without any warning, the squirrel had reappeared on Ashlock's branch. Ashlock tried to hide his utter surprise. Maple, huh? Welcome aboard. The squirrel nodded his head as if agreeing with his welcome. Wait, you can understand me. Ashlock's mind spun with possibilities. Maple tilted his little head and gave a curious smile. Ashlock couldn't tell if the squirrel was doing random movements or understood him. Do a spin. Maple rolled his eyes but complied, pretending to chase his tail. The scratching of his claws against Ashlock's bark seemed to draw Stella's attention as she started rushing toward the tree. A squirrel might chase its tail for fun without me asking. Ashlock grumbled at his own stupidity. Do a flip. There's no way a squirrel would do that randomly for fun. Maple paused, crossed his arms, and shook his little snow-white head with a look of disapproval. As if in retaliation for being demanded to do party tricks, the little bugger pulled free a fruit and munched on it. "Maple!" Stella called from below. "You up there?" The little bastard vanished with a pop and reappeared on Stella's shoulder, passing her a fruit it stole. "Oh, thank you." Stella took the fruit and gave the little guy a rub on the head. "You little shit." Ashlock seriously debated activating his hibernate skill, even that torture would be better than being looked down on by a fucking squirrel. Sigh. The life of a tree wasn't easy. Chapter 13. A Tree's Evil Plan. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Stella's heart beat loudly in her chest. Maple's silky fur helped calm her mind somewhat, but it was still racing. What was that portal? That eye? I have never heard of such a thing. Stella sat on the oak bench with her back leaning against the tree. Why did the tree grow rapidly upwards to try and get inside that fracture in space? Does tree want to escape here? Stella hummed to herself as she gave Maple head rubs. The little squirrel was also a mystery, appearing only moments after the rift had closed. Stella had naturally checked the squirrel for chi, but it had none. Which made no sense. Everyone and everything should have some chi. Because without chi, there is no life. Chi is the soul's will to enact change in the world, so without any chi, did Maple not have a soul? Was it even alive? Stella let out a sigh. At the end of the day, her useless thoughts meant nothing. Maple was friendly, and so was the tree. Whatever secrets they held were none of her business. Stella was glad the pavilion was vacant in moments like these. Silencing the maids about such an event would be troublesome. Shaking her head, Stella decided it was time to go out and train. Her cultivation had soared since she assimilated her chi with the Tao of Lightning, but there was still a long way to go until she could pass the Grand Elder examination looming over her head. Maybe I should just give in and practice those demonic cultivation techniques like the others. A cold shudder went down Stella's spine. She rarely left the Red Vine Peak or interacted with other sect elders. They hid it well, but their heart demons were festering and slowly devouring them. Any quick and easy path to power was bound to have some devastating drawbacks, one Stella wished to avoid. Tree, I have 3 years until the Grand Elder examination. While you were sleeping, I reached the 5th stage of the Soul Fire realm. I may need to leave here for a year or so to train. Will you be fine here? Stella naturally didn't expect an answer, so she stood up to leave. However, to her surprise, Maple began tapping her shoulder. What is it, little guy? Stella asked while stroking his head. Maple gave a thumbs up. Stella tilted her head at the odd gesture. Maple pointed to the tree and then did another thumbs up. Tree. Thumbs up. Stella stroked her chin. Are you telling me tree is fine with me leaving? Maple seemed frustrated with her answer but nodded his little head anyway. Stella shrugged at the squirrel's bizarre behavior, but it was a wild animal, so it would know more about a tree's mood than her. Wait a second. Can you understand the tree? It was well known that the most powerful spirit trees had spirit beasts or guardians that kept them safe as they often couldn't defend themselves. Maple nodded vigorously. Stella furrowed her brows as she tried to process the strange situation. She had debated many times if she was crazy for talking to a tree all day, but now she was communicating with a mystical squirrel. Then, a possibly silly thought crossed her mind. Does the tree like my company? Tell her yes, you little bastard, Ashlock pleaded with the squirrel. Since the little thing wasn't an actual summon but a creature he had made a mutual pact with, he couldn't demand the squirrel do anything, he could only politely suggest and hope it complied. Maple looked at Ashlock with a grin and raised his little hand and, like a Roman emperor, had a thumb to the side. He then slowly tilted it downwards. I will make you some acorn-looking fruit. How about it? Maple's little thumb changed direction and turned upwards and then gave Stella a nod. Ashlock breathed a sigh of relief as Stella's eyes lit up in excitement. The tree likes me. Relief seemed to wash over the young woman, and a bright smile appeared. I'm so glad. Does he want more food? I can get him some while I train outside. To Ashlock's surprise, Maple nodded without Ashlock begging him to. Had the squirrel just been messing with him this whole time? To be fair, Ashlock had only known the little guy for a few minutes. Not even an hour had passed since he had attempted to summon an S.-rank existence from an alternate plane of reality. Well, that settles it then. Stella stood up and started to leave the courtyard. Wanna come with me, little guy, or stay here? Stella asked the squirrel while patting his ear. The squirrel vanished from her shoulder, reappeared on Ashlock's trunk, grabbed a cluster of red fruit, and then rematerialized on Stella's shoulder. Maple then lay happily over Stella's shoulder while casually scoffing the fruits, causing his cheeks to inflate like a hamster. Are those travel rations? Stella giggled, guess you are coming with me then. Keep Stella safe and bring some corpses for me if you can. Ashlock said as the pair left the peak. Maple gave him a little thumbs up as they shut the door and descended the mountain. Despite Stella's surprising speed with purple flames erupting from her feet, Maple seemed very chill with the whole situation, not even needing to hold on to her cloak to stay attached. As expected from a squirrel that could survive in such a place. Ashlock sighed and hoped he would never have to feel fear like he did today ever again. The whole situation had tired Ashlock, so he decided to nap. Ashlock awoke to some light rain. With some excitement, he looked to the sky in search of angry clouds that would strike him down with their wrathful lightning. Sadly, the clouds seemed relatively tame, more gloomy than black. Oh well, a bit of rain is always nice. Although Ashlock used chi to speed up his biology and supplement nutrients that he would be lacking due to the scarcity of nutritious soil, receiving things like rain and sunlight helped a lot. Ashlock felt much better thanks to his 3-day nap, and his mind was now clear. Without the distraction of Stella or Maple, he could now process the events. Right. Where to even start? I guess the first thing to acknowledge is the ability to summon things. So I can gain new skills, acquire items that I can store in my inventory, and now I can even summon things. Ashlock wondered what other great mysteries he had yet to discover regarding his system. Well, one thing I can add to my list of system knowledge is that 2,600 credits gave me my first S-grade draw. A tingling feeling ran through Ashlock's sap as he remembered that alien eye gazing at him with curiosity. The summon failed. Which brings a whole new question. Will I never be able to get anything S-grade until I have upgraded my cultivation? Since the S-grade sign that IN reward failed, would he also be unable to use an S-grade skill if he unlocked one? Luckily, Maple came through the rift and formed a pact with me, so it wasn't a total waste of points. But what if I got an S.-rank item that was impossible for Stella to use? Maybe I should stick to A.-grade draws for now. Deciding that was a good idea, Ashlock chose to pull up his stats to check on his increase in cultivation. Devouring that many monsters should have led to an increase in my cultivation stage. Demonic Spirit Sapling, age 7, Chi Realm. 8th stage, skills. As expected, his cultivation realm had increased from the 7th to the 8th stage of the Chi realm. So I only have one more stage to go until the Soul Forge realm. If Ashlock remembered correctly, a cultivator creates their soul core at the Soul Forge realm. So once I reach the 9th stage of the Chi realm, I will attempt to form a soul core, and if I am successful, I will be considered a soul fire cultivator. Ashlock then thought of Stella mentioning her realm. Then, after the soul core has been formed, a cultivator can climb the next 9 stages in the soul fire realm. Simply put, at the Chi realm, before forming a soul core, a cultivator can only harness the Chi within themselves to empower their muscles and live longer lives. If Ashlock wanted to cast external spells with his Chi, he would need his own fire. Just like Stella's purple flames or the Grand Elder's white flames. So to obtain a personalized fire, Ashlock needed to form a soul core. But the system lets me cast skills. But now that I think about it, these are closer to magic than those fire-based abilities I've seen Stella use. Ashlock hummed to himself as the rain drizzled on his leaves. All this cultivator talk is rather hard to wrap my head around. But the last thing to note is that Stella is at the 5th stage of the Soul Fire realm, below the Star Core realm of the Grand Elders. Another bird landed on Ashlock's branch to shelter from the downpour. If I was in the Soul Fire realm, I could cook this bird in the flames of my soul. For fun, Ashlock tried to fry the bird with his Chi realm cultivation, but all that happened was his Chi became chaotic and rushed around the bark just below the bird. If this pest would land on the ground and stay still, I could cast, devour, but up here is out of the skill's range. Ashlock then looked closely and saw the bird nibbling on one of his fruit. In pure spite, Ashlock summoned his Chi fruit production menu, selected the cluster of fruit the bird was happily eating, and planned to alter the taste to be as bitter as possible. But then Ashlock paused. I have basic poison resistance. Shouldn't I be able to make my fruit poisonous since I consumed poison to gain resistance? Ashlock chuckled evilly as he found the option to add poisons. Finally, I can fight back. Ha ha ha. Ashlock calmed down, it was time to formulate a battle plan. The bird seemed to like the red fruit. There was a slider for the fruit's poisonous level on the menu. I assumed the highest level would be the same as the poison the servant tried to use to assassinate Stella. If it can kill a soul fire cultivator, surely it can kill a stupid bird. Mashing the slider all the way to the maximum, a prompt appeared. Time for completion. 3 days, Ashlock hit accept and then patiently watched the bird. Enjoy your last few days, you parasite. Soon you will fall into my waiting clutches. Just stay for 3 days. Alright. The bird had its fill and left a few hours later once the downpour ceased, leaving Ashlock to curse the bird's 9 generations for making him waste Chi. But more victims would arrive eventually. All he had to do was be patient. Something he was a self-certified expert in. Chapter 14. Assassin Tree. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Fruit production complete, Ashlock metaphorically rubbed his hands together in glee as he watched the open skies, eagerly anticipating a victim. The juicy red fruit hanging from his highest branches should be too tantalizing for any bird to resist. Due to being in the 8th stage of the Chi realm, Ashlock had little trouble using his Eye of the Tree God skill for extended periods of time. So while waiting for his prey, he decided to check on his surroundings. Ashlock surveyed the entire mountain, searching for something interesting. As he zoomed in on a particularly steep section of the mountain, he watched a pebble go into free fall. Tumbling down for 1,000 meters, it smashed into many pieces upon impact with a lower part of the peak. Following the path it took, Ashlock located a small hole in the side of the mountain. Did one of my roots finally reach the edge of the mountain? It was hard to explain to a human, but as a tree, he could feel everything at once, but his mind could only process so much. His body covered thousands of meters when his roots were included, so keeping track of everything was difficult unless something alerted him to an issue such as pain. After checking with his roots, Ashlock confirmed that his suspicions were correct and that the sap conveyor belt was indeed fully operational, with pebbles on the move. This was good news, as the widening of his roots to create a hollow tunnel inside required the removal of the surrounding rock. I would have hoped the rock could be teleported away or stored in a spatial inventory and then dumped somewhere else. That would be a far more efficient solution, but with Ashlock's current skill set, this was the best he could do. It was slow, but at least it would eventually get the job done. You never know when you will need an escape tunnel. I could also get Stella to go down there and mine the Chi minerals. Ashlock had long grown accustomed to the way trees had to think. Human decision-making is often short-term, but Ashlock's slow biology forced him to plan for days, weeks, and sometimes even months in advance. For example, if he stumbled upon a secret room with treasure within the mountain in a few months, and he hadn't started the tunneling process now, it would take another few months before he could get Stella or Maple to retrieve the treasure. For now, the tunnels are only wide enough for Maple if I drain all the sap from them. So it will take a while until Stella can crawl through. Ashlock watched as another pebble was pushed out the opening on the mountainside and tumbled to its demise. Ashlock felt some weight on his branch, so he cancelled out his God skill and found himself back in the courtyard surrounded by many rings of stone covered in runic formations. On his top branch was a curious bird. It was an ugly thing, similar to a vulture, with its grey feathers, crooked neck, and rounded beak with a sickly black tongue hanging out. Its beady eyes locked onto the red fruit, and it shuffled closer. Yes. Ashlock's leaves rustled slightly, causing the bird to look around as if watching out for predators. Ashlock immediately calmed down and quietly moved his chi away from the bird to avoid any issues. The vulture completed its surveillance and then returned its attention to the fruit. It got closer. Then, much to Ashlock's dismay, the bird seemed to sniff the fruit and reel back in disgust. It can smell the poison. Darn it, didn't think of that. Ashlock thought back to when the servant tried to assassinate Stella. Ah, now I see why the poison was dissolved in a tea with a strong aroma rather than a cup of water. The poison must have a distinct smell. The vulture dropped down a branch and cautiously sniffed a bundle of purple fruits with black splotches. They were incredibly sour but were also packed full of chi. The bird seemed confident the fruit contained no poison, so it opened its beak and ate the entire bundle in a single bite. A big mistake. The vulture gagged at the extreme sourness, its face tensed up, and it couldn't see where it was going. Ashlock's bark was smoother than most trees, so the vulture lost its grip and plummeted to the ground 10 meters below. On the way down, it smacked its head on the armrest of the oak bench Stella often sat on. Then everything went silent. Ashlock stared at the unconscious bird in pure wonder. That was rather unexpected. Ashlock chuckled to himself. He never denied a free meal, so he cast, devour, and black vines erupted from the small patch of grass around him that wasn't covered in stone. The vulture was mummified, and by the next day, any evidence of the unlucky bird was long gone. Plus 2 SC, 2 credits. Not too shabby. The bird was rather large and could detect poison, so it was no easy prey for a tree like Ashlock. Luckily his genius had prevailed and the bird was defeated fair and square. Feeling rather smug about his first ever successful kill with his fruit, Ashlock summoned the daily sign.in. Idle tree daily sign.in system day. 2781 daily credit. 7 sacrifice credit. 2 sign in. Now Ashlock was no gambling man, but he was feeling lucky. I can power farm points over the winter, and hopefully, Stella will return with many monster corpses to devour sometime next year. Ashlock only had a measly 9 credits to his name. But he rarely tested what rewards were available at the low end, so now was a great opportunity. Sign in. Sign in successful, 9 credits consumed, unlocked an E.grade item. 10x lightning chi pills. Ashlock eagerly peered into his pocket dimension, where he had stored various items. Currently, only 10 cultivation pills remained, as the earrings and wooden stick had been taken by Stella. Ah, the pills come in a small bottle, Ashlock said as he manipulated the items in his pocket dimension. He unscrewed the cap and took out a pill, feeling the lightning chi emanating from it. Can I absorb this pill? He wondered aloud. Ashlock wasn't sure what type of chi he had, but what could go wrong? It was just a single E.grade pill. Ashlock decided to crush the pill inside him, and as soon as he did, a storm of lightning chi rapidly expanded outward. However, Ashlock was not worried. His own chi came in like a tsunami, crushing the invading chi and snuffing out anything that remained. He suspected that this was due to his lightning chi protection ability. So it seems my body does not appreciate lightning chi, but this experiment does confirm that I can use pills at least. Ashlock was so lost in his thoughts that the day turned to night, and he didn't notice two men approaching the pavilion's door. A knock rang out, followed by a gruff voice. "Stella crestfallen, are you inside?" Obviously, there was no reply. Stella had left over a week ago to kill monsters outside the sect. Ashlock activated his Eye of the Tree God skill and observed the visitors. They were dressed from head to toe in black cloth and looked similar to ninjas. Dim blue flames coated their arms as if ready to flare up at the slightest threat. Ashlock still struggled to measure Cultivator's strength, but these two had a similar level of presence as Stella. So they should be somewhere in the middle of the soul fire realm. The two looked at each other. The taller one chuckled, stepped back from the door, and lowered his hand. Seems the Grand Elder was right. The little rascal did leave her peak unattended. The other nodded and replied in a feminine voice, "Perfect, we want to leave as little evidence behind as possible while we search for the Grand Elder's brother's corpse." Yeah. The man sneered. "You do your business, and I'll do mine, all right." The woman shrugged, and with a burst of blue flames around her feet, she flew over the pavilion walls and gracefully landed in the central courtyard. The man joined her a second later but landed a little awkwardly. The woman supported his arm, but he pulled himself away from her grip. "I'm fine." He grumbled, "Go search inside. I'll look out here." The woman sighed as she summoned a dagger to her hand. "Keep your wits about you," she said, her voice tense with concern. "Stella crestfallen could be here somewhere, or the man who killed Darren." With that, she disappeared into the pavilion in a blaze of blue flame, leaving the man behind. "Tisk," he muttered, stretching his back and looking around. "Just because you're a daughter of the Ravenborn Patriarch, you think you can order me around." Despite the potential danger, the man didn't bother to hide his presence, instead choosing to crank up his soul fire and let the raging blue flames deter anyone who might be lurking nearby. He rubbed his chin as he walked over the extensive runic formation surrounding a large black tree with scarlet leaves. "Now, if I wanted to hide a body or decapitated head, there's no way I would hide it inside a building." The man sneered as he looked off in the direction the woman had gone. "There's no way she will find anything useful in there. I mean, it must have cost a fortune to build something like this. That Stella brat likely sold everything already." The man furrowed his brows, his eyes fixed on the tree. Why would Stella crestfallen, last scion of Redvine Peak, sell everything she owns to build such an inefficient runic formation around a tree? He muttered, his eyes narrowed in thought. As he spoke, Ashlock could feel the presence of the man's flames growing stronger, as if they were beginning to cover his entire body. "I think you might be the key to all this," the man said, his voice filled with suspicion. Ashlock started to panic. He had to admit being a tree in the center of such a dazzling formation made him a rather suspicious target. "I can't talk to him, nor do I have any abilities to kill him." Unfortunately, Ashlock was no protagonist. Otherwise, he could cross cultivation realms and beat the guy even with his meager strength. Alas, Ashlock was a tree at the mercy of those stronger than him. He felt a sense of helplessness wash over him. Is this the end? He wondered as the man approached, his eyes scanning Ashlock's branches and pausing briefly on each of the many fruit clusters. Despite his fear, Ashlock tried to remain calm. There had to be a way out of this situation, right? Chapter 15. Give Take. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The man's attention lingered on each fruit as he stroked his chin and hummed to himself. After a while, the cultivator looked over his shoulder, scouring the pavilion's many windows, presumably for any sign of the female cultivator. As Ashlock nervously awaited his fate, he tried to devise a solution. But then a thought occurred to him. Did he even need a solution? After all, he was a tree. What problem could the cultivator possibly have with him? But then Ashlock tensed as the cultivator returned his sights to the fruit and casually reached up to grab a cluster of indigo fruit that looked similar to apples. As the man felt the weight of the fruit in his hand and caught the scent of chi emanating from it, the cultivator's smile grew wider. Then, the fruit vanished from the man's hand in a seemingly magical spectacle. The golden ring on his hand briefly glowed before fading back to its original dim state. Clearly, the ring had played a role in the fruit's sudden disappearance. A spatial ring, Ashlock grumbled as he watched the cultivator use the artifact to loot the fruits that had taken months to grow and required a significant amount of his chi. Classic cultivator trope. Carrying things in bags is so last century. Despite his annoyance, Ashlock couldn't help but envy the cultivator's use of the spatial ring. Ashlock rolled his non-existent eyes in frustration as the cultivator continued his looting spree. Luckily, I can grow these fruit back, so if it gets him to leave. Being robbed blind and feeling helpless to stop it was beyond infuriating for Ashlock. If he were a human, the cultivator likely would have killed for these fruits and looted his dead corpse without hesitation. The Grand Elder's offhand comments about the value of his fruit played in his mind. This tree is a great find. But I fear if the Ravenborns learn of its existence, they will storm in here unannounced and make a scene. These fruits alone would save them thousands of spirit stones a year in cultivation pills for their juniors. Despite his anger, Ashlock knew there was nothing he could do to stop the cultivator from taking what they wanted. He was just a demonic sapling. Blue flames shrouded the cultivator as he moved with impressive speed, grabbing hundreds of fruits as he dashed between Ashlock's branches in a blur. The ring kept flashing as the fruits vanished from the cultivator's hands faster than Ashlock could see. At the edge of Ashlock's perception of the courtyard, he felt one of the doors open. The cultivator, who was busy stealing his fruit, also noticed this and practically teleported back down the tree with the last bundle of fruit in his hand, a cluster of red-berry-looking fruit. The cultivator's ring flashed, but the berries didn't vanish. "Shit, it's full," the man muttered, his eyes widening in panic. He closed his eyes, likely trying to clear some space in the ring, but it was too late. The female cultivator had already appeared behind him in a single step. The man didn't hesitate any longer and threw the small clusters of fruit into his mouth and gulped them down. Two cold gray eyes peered through the mask of the female cultivator. "I told you not to leave any evidence or take anything." The man didn't turn around, so her eyes narrowed. "Popping pills on the job, are we?" she asked with an irritated tone. "I looked through the entire pavilion during this time. So what have you been doing? Found anything?" The man didn't answer. Instead, he was frothing at the mouth as the brutal poison in the red fruit that acted like cyanide took full effect. His cultivation erupted as he tried to suppress the poison, causing the blue flames coating his shoulders to flare up. The female cultivator took a step back, and a sword materialized in her hand. Blue flames shrouded the blade, and she brought it up in a defensive position. "Showing your true colors now, are we?" She couldn't see the man's face. Ashlock watched the scene play out and considered his options. Ideally, they both leave, but I fear the man will die any second now. Will the woman think I killed the man and chop me down in revenge, or is that just paranoid thinking? Probably. Ashlock's mind raced as fast as his biology allowed. In a perfect world, the man would die, leaving his corpse here, and the woman would leave him alone. Was there a way to alter the course of this situation to his ideal outcome? Ashlock brought up his status screen to recheck his skills. Demonic Spirit Sapling, Age 7, Chi Realm. 8th Stage, Skills, Eye of the Tree God, A, Deep Roots, A, Language of the World, B, Lightning Chi Protection, B, Chi Fruit Production, C, Devour, C, Hibernate, C, Fire Chi Resistance, C, Basic Poison Resistance, F, Basic Meditation, F, yeah, as expected, other than Devour, I still lack any offensive abilities. But, wait. What about my inventory? Ashlock still had the bottle of lightning chi pills. Ashlock suddenly came up with an idea, one so nefarious he almost felt evil. She already thinks he is popping pills on the job, why not make it a reality? The bottle of pills I got was so cheap anyway. Similar to how he summoned the wooden stick all those years ago, Ashlock concentrated on the pill bottle, and it suddenly vanished, rematerializing in the air in front of the male cultivator right as the man was turning around. The female cultivator behind the man watched as the open pill bottle fell, and 9 pills spilled out onto the purple grass. So you plan to betray me? She cursed. Without hesitation, she brought up her burning blade and, in a dazzling display of sword work, not only decapitated the man but also chopped off all 4 of his limbs. Ashlock desperately resisted the hunger as a soul fire realm cultivator's blood painted his roots and bark. The purple grass went a darker shade as the various body part fell to the ground with a thud. The woman expertly shook the blade once, successfully removing all the grime that had coated the sword. She then placed the clean weapon into her spatial ring while looking around the empty courtyard. Deeming the surroundings safe, the woman finally removed her mask and hood, revealing short black hair that gave her a tomboyish appearance. She took a deep breath, shook her head with regret, and walked toward the corpse with a sigh. It seemed killing the man had been a regretful affair. Despite her cute face, her cold gray eyes betrayed her true demeanor as she searched one of the man's chopped-off arms for something. A second later, her dull eyes lit up slightly, she bent down and pulled the golden spatial ring containing Ashlock's stolen fruit free from the man's finger. Whistling to herself, the woman pocketed the spatial ring. Then to Ashlock's horror, she approached him. She observed his naked branches stripped clean of fruit with a hint of suspicion. Emicham. She hummed to herself as she traced a finger down Ashlock's smooth bark but then paused. Chi. Her head tilted. Ashlock had tried to make himself appear as innocent as possible by directing all of his ambient chi away when she approached, but it seemed to have been unable to fool a soul fire cultivator's intuition. The woman closed her eyes, and Ashlock felt a pulse of invasive chi. He practically scurried away inside his own body, fleeing from the woman's unbelievably powerful chi with all his might. Her eyes fluttered open, a spirit tree. Although a rather weak one. She shrugged and stepped away. The discovery of a spirit tree seemed not all that impressive to her. Now, what to do about this? The woman sighed as she looked at the many bits of human scattered across the purple grass. There were even pieces on the runic formation, dyeing the stone red. This should be a demonic tree, right? They like bodies. Getting to work, the woman piled the many body parts up against Ashlock's trunk, which made his hunger unbearable. Then, happy with her work, she scooped up the pill bottle and thunder chi pills, which made Ashlock grumble as he'd hoped she would leave them behind. Well, it's clear where Grand Elder's brother's corpse went with a demonic spirit tree here. The woman turned on her heel with a frown. This will be a lot of trouble. Blue flames erupted around her feet, and with a spectacular leap, she crossed over the pavilion's walls and shot down the mountain with breakneck speed. Those words were rather ominous, but Ashlock didn't care as hunger consumed him. Finally, Ashlock cast Devour. Black vines erupted from the ground and mummified all 5 pieces of the cultivator. A few hours passed, and the message he had been looking forward to appeared in his mind. Plus 100 SC, along with the message came a rush of chi that Ashlock now knew was the sign of a stage advancement. As the sun crested the horizon to signify the start of a new day, Ashlock finally had his rampaging chi under control and had the state of mind to check his status. Demonic Spirit Sapling, Age 7, Chi Realm. 9th stage, only one more realm to complete until I form my soul core. Ashlock felt a sense of excitement. That cultivator may have stolen all his fruit, but the body of a soul fire cultivator had provided him 100 days worth of credits and advanced him an entire stage. It's fine. Those pills were worth only a few credits, and my fruit will grow back quickly with the chi from this soul fire cultivator. Thinking of soul fire cultivators, Ashlock wondered how he was supposed to form a soul core. Was it something he should know how to do instinctively? Or perhaps he would need Stella to guide him. Ashlock looked out at the morning-lit courtyard and saw the runic formation dyed with blood and the scraps of clothing glittering about. Well, this will be hard to explain to Stella when she returns. Chapter 16. Interlude, House Ravenborn. You are listening at novelfull.audio. An hour later, on the neighboring peak shrouded in a perpetual fog, a woman ignored the hawking ravens that observed her while perched upon charred trees and made her way through the low-visibility courtyard with expert movements as if she knew the placement of every shrub and rock. Her black clothes and mask had been left with the maids at the entrance, so the tomboyish girl walked through the hallways of her family's pavilion in skinny trousers that showed off her modest curves and a partially opened shirt. Diana, welcome home. Did the mission go well? A woman with a thin smile appeared from behind the doorway, causing Diana to pause and glance at the person with cold gray eyes. Diana sighed and ran a hand through her short black hair. No, mother. Unfortunately, there were some complications. Of course, there were. Diana's mother snapped, her smile turning into a vile smirk. If your brother was still alive, we would have sent him. At least he knew how to get shit done. Diana shoved past her mother, causing her to shriek even louder. If not for that Stella crestfallen bitch killing my son, I wouldn't have to deal with the likes of you. Diana clenched her fist as she stormed down the corridor. It wasn't her fault her brother died to Stella at the tournament 3 years ago. Yet ever since, as the new heir to House Ravenborn, she had been forced into a position she never wanted. Diana had found comfort living in her brother's shadow, with him outperforming her in every aspect possible. How did Stella kill her brother all those years ago? What had he seen that had instigated such fear he couldn't even move as he was struck down? It was a question that plagued everyone's minds. Was it an artifact? A rare martial technique? Nobody knew, and that's what she had been sent to investigate, among other things. It took Diana over 10 minutes to reach her room. She mostly ignored everyone as she passed through the corridors. Some returned the favor, while others stopped her to chat or pay respects. Being the scion of a powerful house was a tiresome affair that only put a large target on her back. She practically flopped onto her bed and relished its softness for a while in the safety of her room. She knew her father would want a report on the mission soon, so in the meantime, she fished into her pocket and retrieved the golden ring. Unfortunately, it still had the lingering scent of her cousin on it, which made her frown as the events of an hour ago played in her mind. Now that she thought about it, her cousin had acted very oddly. She despised him, like everyone else in the family, but killing her would make no sense. He wasn't in direct line for succession, nor was anyone on his side of the family. Wait. What type of pills did he drop? Diana opened her spatial ring within her mind and retrieved the pills. It was hard to tell without getting a feel of the ambient chi. Amicham. These are lightning chi pills. Cousin practiced water cultivation techniques. These would kill him. What possible reason could he have to consume one? A flash of horror appeared on Diana's face. Had she made a mistake killing him? Of course, killing her cousin would earn her some enforced self-reflection or a beating, but it wouldn't be a massive deal so long as she could give a good explanation. Why was he acting so strange, though? Diana's eyes narrowed, and she sat up on her bed. The golden ring of her cousin was still warm and had some blood stains on it, which made Diana's stomach churn. Murder may be an accepted part of demonic sect culture, but it didn't make murder any easier. Closing her eyes, she got to work. One couldn't simply enter another person's spatial ring as they were sealed with their power. A monarch realm spatial ring could only be opened by another monarch realm. So it was the same situation here. Luckily her cousin was weaker than her by a few stages in the soul fire realm, so she easily cracked its defenses within half an hour. Her shirt was damp with sweat as she wiped her brow with her sleeve and sighed. Finally done. Taking a deep breath, she closed her eyes again and felt inside the ring. Within was a pocket space around the size of her wardrobe, and it was stuffed full of fruit. Diana's brows furrowed in confusion. She didn't even recognize half the fruit in there, had her cousin stumbled upon a remote area in the mountains. Or perhaps a secret realm. While her mind raced with possibilities, she summoned a random fruit, and it appeared in her hands. Instantly she caught a whiff of dense chi within the fruit. Which was rare. Just to compare, Diana summoned a moon orange from her personal spatial ring. They were a great snack that many cultivators enjoyed due to their great taste and a minuscule amount of chi that helped them recover after a laborious cultivation session. Weighing the two different fruits in her hand, it was obvious the one from her cousin's ring contained many times more chi than the moon orange. Diana frowned and tried to remember the strict gardener's teachings from when she was young. Trees often produce fruit with tiny hints of chi to encourage the monsters that roam the wilderness to consume their fruit and deposit their seeds elsewhere. Of course, the same result can be achieved by making the fruit taste good. Diana then remembered the man's face turning dark as if remembering a horrifying memory. But monsters are infamous for their lackluster taste buds and almost insanity-inducing obsession with getting stronger. They devour us humans bones and all without batting an eye. Diana smiled at the memory. She had been so young, but that man never sugar-coated his words. Always answering her most burning questions with the vocabulary of a vulgar drunkard. Diana shook her head to remove these useless thoughts. In her hand was something of great value. Sure, the chi contained was too weak to affect her, but it showed there was a plant out there that could produce fruit with this much chi. I would guess it's around the 8th stage of the chi realm. Diana paused as she came to a realization. Assuming a tree produced this fruit, it would need to be a spirit tree. One that can cultivate. The normal wild trees can barely reach the threshold for the first stage of the chi realm. Diana rubbed her chin as the scene of her cousin's death played in her mind. She had found him standing in front of a demonic tree, one of the more common types of spirit tree throughout the wilderness. Even she had seen a few during her excursions out of the sect. They weren't known for producing fruit other than some poisonous berries. Weaker monsters ate these tiny berries, died a gruesome death, and then were digested by the tree's roots due to the slightly acidic mud. My cousin wouldn't have been stupid enough to eat the berries of a demonic tree. Right. Diana couldn't find another plausible explanation for his behavior. But there were still unsolved mysteries. Why did her cousin have lightning cultivation pills? Why is one missing, and where the hell did all this fruit come from? A knock at her bedroom door made her jump in her skin. Yeah. Diana half replied as she put the fruit back in her cousin's ring and scrambled for a place to hide it. Diana Ravenborn, your father wishes to meet with you in the hall. A tired man's voice came through the door. Okay, I am just changing into appropriate clothes. I will be out in a second. Diana lifted a floorboard. Beneath, tucked between cobwebs and dust, was a small lockbox that blocked spiritual sense so others wouldn't detect its contents. The Grand Elder does not accept tardiness, young lady. You should have gone to greet him first. The man grumbled, and Diana heard the door handle click open. Diana gritted her teeth. Bastard doesn't respect me one bit. Then, before the man could get around the door and see what she was doing, she stuffed the ring into the box, shut it close, and pushed the floorboard back into place with a thud. She covered the sound with a loud yawn, making the man who had entered frown. Ahem. Diana pushed past the man. Let's go. Best not keep father waiting. I killed him. Diana sat lazily in a wooden chair with her head propped up by her arm. Across from her was her father, the Grand Elder of House Ravenborn. Despite her bold statement, her father barely flinched or showed any emotion. As expected of a star core cultivator. Even without him exerting his presence, everything in the room felt heavy. In fact, even sitting in his presence strained Diana's muscles, hence her slouched posture. The Grand Elder's gray eyes bore into his daughter's soul. Diana Ravenborn, you better have an exemplary reason. Your cousin may have been a blubbering fool, but our family's position hasn't been great since your brother's early death at the hands of the crestfallen heir. The man spat out the name of the girl that had consumed his mind over the past 3 years. The younger generation has been lacking behind the other houses. Only your brother was a true genius. Diana resisted, rolling her eyes. Her family would take any opportunity possible to compare her to her brother, despite him being long dead by now. No, father, my cousin was already dead. Although I didn't know that at the time. Diana continued before her father could open his mouth again. He ate the berries from a demonic spirit tree in the courtyard. Why he ate the berries? I have no clue. There was a long pause until the Grand Elder rose to his feet and walked across the room. Everything trembled as he walked, as if a tremendous force was pressing down from the heavens above. Diana, the demonic sex way of life where the strongest rule, mirrors the wilderness that surrounds the Blood Lotus sect for thousands of miles. As the man walked, the floor creaked, and his black robes swayed with his movements. This is why the celestial sects under the control of the Celestial Empire treat us rural demonic sects like savages. So why must you play into the stereotype of our people by slaughtering your cousin in cold blood? Father, the man shot her a glare, so fierce her words got caught in her throat. I mean, Grand Elder. Diana quickly corrected herself, I already told you he killed himself by consuming a demonic tree's poisonous berries. The Grand Elder pinched the bridge of his nose in frustration. Daughter, I will not believe for 1 second that a man carrying some of my genes would be foolish enough to consume such obviously poisonous berries while on a strategic mission. Then letting out a profound sigh, he turned around and went to stand before a window that gazed out upon the vast Blood Lotus sect. I am surrounded by idiots. There was a pause. What of the mission? The man's voice was as cold as ice. Diana gulped. The pavilion was empty. Most of the rooms were covered in dust and decay. But I believe I may know where your brother's corpse went. The Grand Elder didn't turn to meet her gaze as he already knew the answer. That crestfallen brat fed your uncle's cold corpse to the tree, didn't she? Maybe. Diana shifted nervously on her wooden seat. Her eyes darted to the door. She desperately wanted to leave before her father gave her a fitting punishment for her actions. But that is just my theory. There were no bones or any leftover possessions like those normally found around the roots of demonic trees. Useless. The Grand Elder's voice thundered through the room. The Patriarch has ordered me not to lay a single finger on that crestfallen brat because she is an and coming prodigy of the sect. Diana felt a shiver go down her spine as her father smiled. He never smiled. Your punishment for this failure. The man's smile was sickening as he tapped his chin. Kill Stella Crestfallen. Diana blinked at the words. Utterly gobsmacked. If even her father couldn't get away with killing the girl. He is using me as a sacrificial pawn. I don't care how you do it, but you must do it cleanly. The Grand Elder walked over and loomed over Diana, you hear me, brat. If you do not perform this task within the next 5 years. Then it's time you face a beast tide. Alone. In other words. A death sentence. Either she killed Stella Crestfallen and died at the hands of the Patriarch, or she went against her father's wishes, and he'd send her on a suicide mission himself. Diana thought of the fruit in her cousin's spatial ring and how much she despised her family. Should she run away? Maybe Stella would know a way out of this predicament. It might be worth asking. Chapter 17. Eye in the Sky. You are listening at novelfull.audio. With the beginning of a new day, Ashlock's mind had somewhat calmed, and he could rethink his situation. He had been under the false pretense that he was safe in this courtyard. Nobody worked here, and apart from the Grand Elder visiting, there was only Stella here, and he had no issue with her taking his fruit whenever she wanted. He had been naive, the equivalent of someone walking around a bad neighborhood flaunting excessive jewelry and then getting mad over being robbed as if it was a surprising turn of events. Truly foolish. The Grand Elder had mentioned ages ago how valuable his fruit was, and he had stupidly grown so much fruit that his branches were practically drooping from the weight. Yet he got angry when a demonic cultivator passed by and robbed him blind. Ashlock should be grateful he wasn't chopped down for firewood. At least the fruit can be regrown. But should it be? I have enough chi in my body from devouring that soul fire cultivator to regrow at least half those fruit within a month, but for what? Stella. Stella had been using the fruit as food and a cultivation aid since she didn't have a chef and couldn't afford to buy many cultivation pills. Which reminded Ashlock of the pills he had obtained for a few credits that he lost to that woman. The pills were a minor setback compared to the fruit, which had been on display and could be regrown. At the time, Ashlock had no idea the demonic cultivators were so ruthless to each other. Although the deployment of the pills at the male cultivator's feet had led to the woman chopping him down without further question, it was still regrettable to lose the pills that might have aided Stella. Okay, from now on, I will keep a low profile until I can protect myself. No more flaunting fruit or giving away freebies to invaders. Ashlock shouted his declaration to an empty courtyard. Only the chirps of birds and the summer breeze accompanied him. Ashlock debated sleeping until Stella came back, but the intense sun on his scarlet leaves filled him with energy, so feeling productive, he activated his god eye skill and looked around. Reaching a new stage of his cultivation realm naturally led to a significant increase in his view range. I can now see the entirety of the neighboring peak. Ashlock remembered the experience of the Grand Elder staring straight at him, so he kept some distance. Luckily, he didn't have to investigate too hard to figure out who this peak belonged to because a very helpful engraved brass plaque over the pavilion's grand entrance read, "House Ravenborn." As Ashlock watched the entrance, the door slammed open, and a woman he recognized all too well strolled out. However, this time, she wasn't wearing her ninja outfit or a mask. Instead, her short black hair slightly obscured her gray eyes, almost brimming with tears. He hadn't noticed earlier, but her freckles suited her. "Diana Ravenborn, what did your father tell you?" A woman with similar but more mature features, likely the woman's mother, appeared behind the woman named Diana and grabbed her wrist. "Do you think you can ignore me, you unfilial child?" Diana frowned at her gripped wrist. "I'm leaving, mother. The Grand Elder gave me a task." Diana looked away, refusing to meet her mother's intense glare. "It will likely be my last." "Leaving where?" "Last task." The mother's voice was shrill and hard to listen to. "Come back inside, and let's discuss this." Her voice then dropped to a whisper, "If something happens to you, the other concubines will gain ground on me. Understand? Your father has refused my advances recently, and I fear I am on my way out of his chambers. After your brother's death, you became the next heir by default, but your talents don't match up to your brothers or cousins, so I fear the Grand Elder may try to dispose of you." Blue flames exploded around Diana's wrist, making the mother reel back in pain. "I am leaving, mother. I have no wish to be your political pawn anymore. Goodbye." Diana forcefully pulled her wrist to her side, adjusted the wrinkles in her white shirt, and pushed her hair behind her ear to keep it from falling in her face as she descended from her family's peak. Despite her mother's cries for her to return, Diana remained undeterred and even smirked as she watched her mother being dragged back inside by a group of maids, kicking and screaming. Ashlock marveled at the sight of Ravenborn Peak, which, although not as tall as Red Vine Peak, still stood several thousand meters tall with clouds drifting lazily by. Yet, despite its impressive height, like a human comet of blue flames, Diana shot down its side with unfathomable speed, taking 100 steps at a time, never breaking her stride. I want legs. Ashlock grumbled. What's the point of being reborn in a world with superpowers if I'm stuck in place like this? Finally, in a surge of dirt, Diana arrived at the mountain's base with a grunt. She patted herself down and confirmed the few items connected to the loops in her jeans were secure. Then with one last look over her shoulder at her home, Diana sighed and strode down the paved road. Due to his increased view range, Ashlock could continue following Diana. After half an hour of walking, which wasn't far, considering how leisurely she was strolling with her hands clasped behind her head and whistling the whole time. As Diana crested a ridge, the edge of a town came into view. Wait. A town. Ashlock was almost on the edge of his non-existent seat in excitement. Deciding to allow Diana to take him on an unknowing tour, Ashlock's view remained far up in the sky, looking on from above. If only my skill let me see through walls. Ashlock didn't know why, but his skill had two restrictions. First, he always had a semi-bird's eye view, he couldn't go too close to the ground. The other was the inability to go inside buildings. Maybe if I get an X.ray skill, I could see through the walls. Or do I need to upgrade, Eye of the Tree God, into an S.grade skill through a lucky sign that I draw? Ashlock removed the useless thoughts as he focused on the town. The snake-like roads paved with gray stone were flanked by multi-story wooden buildings with slanted slated roofs. These buildings followed a similar architecture to the pavilion Ashlock's body was stuck in with their classical Chinese style. Diana strode with the confidence of an empress down the crowded street. People of all ages who were relishing the warm summer weather moved to the side to let her pass. Most of them were dressed in subdued shades of brown or black, a reflection of the traditional style of the buildings that lined the street. In contrast, Diana's clothing stood out, with its modern design that now caught Ashlock's attention for its unusualness. He had mistakenly assumed that her outfit was normal because it was a popular style back on Earth and hadn't noticed its distinctiveness in this unfamiliar setting. Even Stella wore a more traditional cloak. So why does Diana dress like that? Whatever its purpose, it was evident by how people scurried to the side to avoid her path that she had a reputation. Likely a bad or tyrannical one. Or is it her family's reputation? Ashlock looked a little closer and noticed that Diana was the only one giving off a fair amount of chi. Is she the only cultivator here? Ashlock thought back to the stories he read back on Earth and realized cultivators were usually rare. Most people had mortal bodies not fit for cultivation or simply never had the resources or guidance to pursue the path of immortality. Diana stopped in front of a store. A round man with a comical mustache approached Diana and gave a respectful bow which seemed to win him. Esteemed cultivator, welcome to my humble store. We do not take payment in spirit stones. Dragon crowns fine. Diana crossed her arms and glared at the man. Why that you must be joking. My monthly earnings aren't even a single dragon crown, how could I possibly? The man bowed again as he saw Diana raise a brow. I forgot that we recently started accepting spirit stones. Diana smirked and walked past the man who was almost twice her size in both height and width but looked like a scared cat as she passed. Ashlock couldn't follow Diana inside, so he surveyed the rest of the town while he waited for her to leave. Unfortunately, his view range only allowed him to see a section of the town closest to his peak. When I reach the next realm, I should be able to see many times further. Right. While Ashlock was soaring above the town with his skill, he spotted a marketplace. It was a large square with a river flowing through the middle. Brick arch bridges crossed a fast-flowing river every 20 meters. Ox-driven carts crossed the bridges to transport items from the market vendors to stores down the road. It seemed this was the hub for trade in the town. Listening to some conversations, Ashlock learned more about the people's simple lives here. One elderly farmer complained to younger women selling seeds about how bad the harvests had been this year and asked if he could have a discount. Please, Florence. You always cut me a good deal, right? Look at my old bones. This will likely be my last season tending to the rice paddies. The man leaned on the cart, and the young woman standing behind frowned. Mr. Richards, please keep your hands off my merchandise. There will be no discounts. I have a sick brother at home and can barely afford medicine. The woman then crossed her arms in annoyance. It's beast tide season. The merchants from the Celestial Empire haven't come around these parts in months. Beast tides. The old man spat to the side. Those good for nothing cultivators can deal with them while we flee. In my long life, this is the third time I've had to move to survive those darn beasts. Mr. Richards, don't disrespect the cultivators. The woman never finished her sentence as a figure came hurtling from the sky and obliterated her, like squashing an insect. A man shrouded in green flames frowned at where he landed. Oops, I misjudged my landing, the man nervously chuckled as he shook his foot, trying to rid it of the sticky blood and bits of flesh that had once been the young woman. He then noticed the half-destroyed seed cart and asked, "Is this cart yours?" The old man absent-mindedly nodded, too shocked to form words. The green flame cultivator walked over to the old man and patted him on the shoulder, placing a few spirit stones in his open hand. "I'm sorry for your loss," the cultivator said before turning and heading down the street. Ashlock noticed that the street led to the store where Diana was currently located. The old man blinked at the spirit stones in his hand and then at the half-destroyed cart overflowing with seeds. Thank you, Sir Cultivator, for your generosity." The man bowed, and the cultivator waved him off without looking back. The old man then pocketed the spirit stones with a sly smile, walked over to the cart, grabbed a bag, filled it with as many seeds as he could carry, and then with a grin, he set off toward his field, leaving the women's smashed corpse for the birds. Chapter 18. Winterrath. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Despite his numerous murders and consumption of human flesh, Ashlock couldn't help but feel outraged when he witnessed someone so indifferent to the death of an innocent stall owner. The sudden change in the attitude of the elderly man, who had previously disrespected cultivators, only served to highlight the backstabbing nature among the individuals of this world. Would Stella backstab me like that at the first opportunity? Ashlock wondered as he curiously followed the green flame cultivator with his skill. The man's flames had died down, and he wore a permanent scowl as he sauntered down the street. As if he was parting the Red Sea, people scrambled to get out of his way, and he snorted as a mortal tripped and fell, spilling everything they were carrying on the sidewalk. The man was about to pass by the store Diana was currently shopping in, but he paused mid-step, and his neck practically snapped in the direction of the store, and his eyes lit up as if he was trying to look through the building's walls. "There you are." The cultivator muttered and strode toward the door. Before the cultivator could open the door, the shop owner ran out, "Esteemed cultivator, welcome to my humble store. May you please wait out here for a moment." The round man with the comical mustache was practically bowing to his feet, and sweat dripped from his forehead. "There is another patron already inside." The man paid the store owner as much attention as one would a barking dog, and despite the round man's pleas, he tried to step past the large man. "Esteemed cultivator. It is store policy that only one cultivator can be present in the store at any given time. We do this to avoid fights and damage to the store." The cultivator scowled and looked down at the store owner. Despite being a rather large man himself, the store owner shrunk under the cultivator's intense glare. "Mortal, you dare order me around?" Green flames flickered to life across the cultivator's broad shoulders. He was easily over 2 meters tall, and his arms, thick as tree trunks, were on display since the white cloak he wore was sleeveless. No, I wouldn't dare." The store owner balled his fists at his side and clenched his teeth but refused to move. The cultivator furrowed his brows, then "Step aside. I have business with your patron." The shop owner stumbled as he was pulled backward, and from his aerial view, Ashlock saw Diana emerge from the shop and stand in the doorway. Her arms were crossed under her chest, and her cold gray eyes glared at the cultivator. "Diana Reborn. The cultivator spread his arms wide and wore an overly fake smile, just the person I have been looking for. Diana tilted her head, Wayne Evergreen, this is Ravenborn territory. You better have a great explanation for being here and threatening one of our taxpayers. Wayne's mysterious smile made Diana frown. Diana, your family has flaunted the wealth of their spirit stone mines for far too long. Wayne clicked his fingers and crossed his arms as two green flame cultivators leapt from the roof and landed beside him, leaving cracks in the pavement. Blue flames shrouded Diana, and she took a step back. Wayne, have you thought this through? Attacking the scion of a family on their own territory is a declaration of war. Wayne grinned, you must not have heard the great news. He spread his arms wide as his grin widened, my sister has married the scion of Winterrath. Diana's face instantly fell. So Evergreen and Winterrath have allied. That's right. Wayne nodded, and with our combined strength, the elders believe it's time to. A loud bell chimed across the city, followed by screams. Wayne looked over his shoulder and pursed his lips at the smoke-filled sky. Appears they started without me. Wayne looked down at Diana with a crooked smile, now come with me. Diana summoned a silver blade and coated it in blue flames, quickly rolling to the side to avoid Wayne's green flame-empowered fist. The shockwave from the punch obliterated the shopfront behind her, but Diana's short stature allowed her to easily avoid the homing fists of the evergreen cultivators. She stayed low to the ground, taking advantage of her agility and quick reflexes to evade their relentless attacks. As she moved, Diana searched for an opening to strike back. Ashlock watched the chaos from the sky. He could see cultivators with green and white flames destroying everything in the city. In the distance, he could see 5 balls of blue fire rocketing down the Ravenborn peak toward the town, but they would arrive too late. Diana was surrounded on all sides. Diana and Wayne were evenly matched, both seemingly in the advanced stages of the soul fire realm. Wayne slammed his fists into the ground, causing the cultivator's chi to surge into the dirt beneath the paved street. Diana was agile and quick, using her techniques to evade and counterattack. She moved like water, slipping past the evergreen cultivator's brutal attacks and attempting to strike back. Despite her efforts, the evergreen cultivator's techniques seemed to shrug off all her attacks, their focus on hand-to-hand combat and defense, making them formidable opponents. The two sides fought fiercely, neither able to gain the upper hand despite the difference in number. As the battle raged on, Ashlock couldn't help but notice the evergreen cultivators' disorganized and chaotic fighting style. They were more of a hindrance to each other than a cohesive unit. Diana was making her way through the fray, her glowing blade a blur of silver as she aimed for the neck of an evergreen cultivator. Suddenly, a thick vine shot up from the ground, entangling Diana's leg and pulling her to the ground. Diana tried to swing her sword at the vine in a desperate attempt to break free, but a well-timed punch from an evergreen cultivator sent her blade off course and uselessly struck the ground. A second punch hit Diana square in the jaw, causing her head to rebound off the pavement, causing her to groan. But considering the impact left a dent in the stone, and Diana wasn't even bleeding, was a testament to how strong a cultivator's body was. More vines sprung from the ground and wrapped around all 4 of Diana's limbs. Wayne Evergreen had a ruthless grin with his hands still in the hole. Ashlock almost didn't want to watch anymore, the situation seemed hopeless. Diana's blue flames flared up and began to burn the vines, but her concentration wavered as 2 more punches hit her head from the 2 other evergreen cultivators. There didn't appear to be much force behind the cultivators' attacks, as if they weren't trying to kill her. Do they want to take Diana as a hostage? Ashlock wondered as he watched. Is this how gods felt? Watching the mortals fight over petty matters. The skill did have God in the name. So maybe he was a god. A tree god. That was a funny thought, which certainly didn't match the situation. Ashlock was silently rooting for Diana. The evergreen guy seemed like an asshole, and a small part of Ashlock hoped Diana might be better than these other cultivators. Maybe it was just a pipe dream, perhaps all cultivators were the same, but until Ashlock saw proof, he held on to his belief that there were some good seeds among the bad apples. Punches kept raining down on Diana, and she screamed as she lashed around, trying to sever the roots or one of the cultivator's limbs. Blood leaked from her broken nose, and black bruises appeared all over her body. Ashlock wished he could help and at least make it a fair fight. This was too painful to watch. Ashlock debated leaving the scene to examine another area of the city where he could see smoke rising and people rushing away from burning buildings. "You bastard!" A voice Ashlock recognized as the store owner cried out, and Ashlock watched in amazement as the chubby man charged at Wayne Evergreen with a frying pan. He held it high over his head in a two-handed grip and, with a holler, brought it down with all his might upon Wayne's head. There was a resounding thud, but Wayne seemed entirely unaffected. Instead, he slowly turned to look at the chubby man with an angry expression. "You insect!" Wayne snarled and spat at the chubby man. The man exploded. Ashlock blinked. What just happened? Was that ball of spit empowered with chi? Was the difference between a soul fire cultivator and a mortal so great that they could die from being spat on? However, in that brief moment when Wayne had been distracted by the shopkeeper, Diana had managed to summon a dagger from her storage ring. Her grip was awkward, but she managed to throw it at Wayne's face with surprising speed and accuracy. Wayne's eyes widened when he saw the dagger coming for his face, and he instinctively cancelled out his technique that seemed to require his hands to remain in the ground and raise them to block. Luckily, he was too slow, and the blade sunk into his cheek, causing him to stumble back while howling in pain. The vines lost their strength and burned instantly to Diana's flames without Wayne's chi powering them. Diana leapt to her feet and charged at one of the evergreens. He had similar features to Wayne, so they were clearly related, but he was a bit shorter and had a more square face. He raised his two hands and stood like a boxer with green flames flaring to life on his fists. The two exchanged a flurry of attacks. Diana spun around with her silver blade empowered with blue flames, but every slash she made was reflected with a well-timed punch. Diana breathed heavily and used her sword to keep herself upright as she clutched her broken nose. As the two evergreen cultivators closed in on the exhausted and bruised Diana, they both paused. Ashlock felt it too. The ground trembled. Something big was coming. Ashlock cast his attention to the far distance. It was just at the edge of his perception range, but once it appeared, he felt a chill down his non-existent spine, despite being so far away. An ice golem, 1,000 meters tall, emerged from the darkness of his vision range like a final boss taking center stage. Perched upon its shoulder was an albino man with scarlet eyes. He stood perfectly still like a statue, with a face unmoving. However, that wasn't all. A violent snowstorm of cataclysmic proportions flanked the ice golem and blocked out the sunlight for many miles. With every step the golem took, the ground trembled, and houses collapsed. Ashlock had no clue who the guy was, but he could make an educated guess. A higher up of the Winterrath family had arrived. Chapter 19. Peak of Power. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Everyone seemed to pause and stare at the incoming calamity, even those supposedly on the same side as the new arrival. The Winterrath elder standing upon the titanic ice golem shouted, "Grand Elder Ravenborn." His words boomed for 1,000 miles. Ashlock knew the man's voice traveled that far since Ashlock's leaves rustled from the words, and he was 2 mountain peaks away. The 5 balls of blue fire charging down the Ravenborn mountain peak paused at the base, leaving the earth below them scorched. The fire dissipated and revealed 5 men with irate expressions. They all had cold gray eyes, midnight black hair, and narrow faces, except for one. The man who stood at the front of the 5 seemed a bit older with salt and pepper hair and some wrinkles, which was jarring compared to the other cultivator's perfect skin. Either this man is very old for a cultivator, or maybe he started cultivating later in life. Ashlock mused to himself. Is that even possible? All the men wore black robes that went all the way to the floor and had their hands clasped behind their backs. The golden ring of the elderly one at the front flashed with power, and a majestic sword materialized under his feet. It was a blade of obsidian, darker than night, with a golden trim around the handle. Ashlock had never seen such a beautiful personification of death before. Blue flames shrouded the blade in a density so great that it appeared like liquid fire. Finally, the sword rose and took the man into the sky. A Winterrath dog dares to bark up this old man's tree. The Ravenborn Grand Elder's voice was like a silent whisper yet reached all who dared listen. He crossed his arms with a sneer. You may have been a relevant family back at the old sect that bordered the frozen lands, but since the beast tide forced us to move, you are nothing compared to me. The Ravenborn Grand Elder raised his wrinkled hand above his head. Wisps of blue flames left in droves and formed ravens of blue fire that flanked the Grand Elder and ignited the sky. Those who dare stand against the raven will fall. The Grand Elder then pointed a wavering finger toward the ice golem that loomed over the town under the Ravenborn's protection. The blue fire ravens 10 times the size of the Grand Elder shot forth at speeds bullets couldn't even dream of reaching. Sonic booms echoed out and caused windows to shatter and people to stumble below as the ravens slammed into the titan of ice, causing more explosions. The Winterrath Grand Elder raised a brow as the ice golem trembled and stumbled back a mighty step. The attack had turned the golem into Swiss cheese, and one of its arms had become detached, crashing to the ground below and smashing an entire street of houses. Steam rose from the ice golem as blue fire melted the ice. The Winterrath Grand Elder decided to abandon ship and summoned a sword of pure white that resembled a sharpened icicle and, like the Ravenborn Grand Elder, used it to fly high into the sky. Despite the situation and apparent overwhelming defeat, Ashlock found it strange how unperturbed the Winterrath man appeared. His scarlet eyes casually looked at the Ravenborn Grand Elder as if he was a misbehaving child. White flames that had shrouded the Winterrath Grand Elder dissipated. Then, like a puppet cut from its strings, the ice golem groaned as it began to crumble under its own weight. Then the golem exploded into many pieces that surged into the town below like an avalanche. Diana happened to be in the path of destruction. The evergreen cultivators were distracted for a moment as they watched a wave of ice 3 stories high hurtling toward them at break-neck speeds. Everything in the avalanche's path was obliterated, and the rubble of houses and corpses of mortals were ground up and joined the surge. The ground trembled, and everyone struggled to stay standing. Diana noticed an opportunity to pull a fast one on her opponents. With Wayne Evergreen still distracted with pulling out the dagger lodged into his cheek and downing healing pills, Diana charged at the remaining 2 evergreen cultivators, who were too busy looking at their impending doom. Diana was fast, agile, and graceful, whereas the evergreen cultivators were territorial and unmoving. In the face of an unstoppable force, the evergreen cultivators had no choice but to hunker down and brave the storm. Green flames solidified around their forms as they braced for the incoming avalanche. Diana dashed behind them, slashing at their tendons with a swift blade. Without a pause to witness the damage, she charged right at the avalanche, ignoring the howls of pain from behind. Ashlock watched in amazement as Diana brought her sword before her, and like Moses parting the Red Sea, the blue flames carved a path. It was narrow and ever changing with the flow of the rubble, but she navigated the treacherous path with laser-like precision. Ashlock almost thought the woman had escaped her enemies, but alas, Wayne seemed to have healed himself. Like a raging bull, the evergreen cultivator barreled down the newly created path after Diana and forcefully widened it when needed with his own might. As the game of cat and mouse began between 2 soul fire cultivators, the Star Core Grand Elders stood on their swords thousands of meters above and calmly stared at each other. Either the Ravenborn Grand Elder placed little value on the town full of mortals, or he had a fantastic poker face. Ashlock honestly couldn't read either of them, but the battle wouldn't end until one died, that much was certain. The Ravenborn Grand Elder made a hand gesture, and the blue flame ravens he was micromanaging that were still in existence even after decimating the ice golem were redirected. Some went to deal with the storm 100 miles long that was slowly encroaching on the land, while the others shot straight at the Winterrath Grand Elder. The albino man with scarlet eyes seemed uninterested in the incoming attack. White flames lazily appeared on his arm, and he slapped the pitiful ravens away as if they were hapless birds. The ravens tumbled to the ground like broken toys. White flames ate away at the blue firebirds, corrupting them, and likely causing their connection to be cut. Grand Elder, you call me a barking dog yet guard the door of your home. The Winterrath Grand Elder taunted and summoned a second light blue sword that flashed with power to his hand. If your pathetic excuse of a son was anything to go by, the renowned Ravenborn Grand Elder's skills with the sword may have dulled with old age. The man's scarlet eyes curved up in mock amusement. Come, face my blade. It's time the new generation strike down the old. To his credit, the Ravenborn Grand Elder didn't flinch or frown at the Winterrath's provocation. Instead, his eyes grew colder and narrowed as if he were scouring the skyline for something. Your cheap tricks won't work on an old man like me. The Ravenborn Grand Elder began to retreat toward his mountain's peak, but the Winterrath Grand Elder barreled forward with his knees bent slightly and the blue sword lowered to his side as if preparing to do an upwards cut. Ashlock almost thought the man teleported with how quickly he closed the gap. The Ravenborn Grand Elder cursed and summoned a second sword to defend himself. As the blades clashed, a wave of chi flattened all the buildings below for miles, sending the Ravenborn Grand Elder rocketing down as a ball of blue flames into the ground below. The dust settled as the Ravenborn Grand Elder emerged from the crater and rolled his shoulders. He seemed distracted by something, his gray eyes glancing over his shoulder at his mountain peak that towered behind him. Then he seemed to notice something, and Ashlock followed the gaze. Vines covered in green flames were slowly crawling up the peak like snakes. The man's eyes went wide. You sly bastard, you teamed up with the Evergreens, didn't you? The Ravenborn Grand Elder roared and jumped to the sky, only for the Winterrath Grand Elder to smash him on the head with a brutal overhead slash, sending him hurtling back down into the hole for a second time. Stay down. The albino man sneered as he sheathed his blade. Watch as your mediocre descendants meet their end. The other 4 men that had come down with the Ravenborn Grand Elder were each busy trying to fend off green and white flame cultivators of similar strength from ascending the mountain. They were outmatched, 2 to 1, and the green vines restricted their movement. Their defeat was inevitable. The Ravenborn Grand Elder took the skies once more. His poker face was long gone and replaced with a wrathful fury. His blade shone with power as he stepped and appeared in front of the Winterrath man. The two exchanged a flurry of attacks, decimating the land below and sending echoes throughout the valley. They moved with such speed and violence Ashlock struggled to keep up with the combat. So this is the peak of power in this world. If just one of these people managed to invade Earth, they would become the world's undisputed king. Yet Stella said there were higher realms. How has this entire planet not been destroyed yet? How can the mortal people even survive? Ashlock suddenly felt very weak and small. What great power would he reach once he achieved the Star Core realm and was on the same level as the Grand Elders alongside his cheat-like skills? Then a horrifying realization dawned on Ashlock. These people can summon storms, fly at the speed of light, and obliterate towns with just the sound waves from their swords clashing, yet an entire sect of these people had to move due to a beast tide. Just how strong are the monsters in this world? Ashlock hoped he would never have to find out, but with rumors of one on the way, he may find out sooner than later. Chapter 20. Supernova. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Throughout the intense flurry of attacks that decimated the surroundings, Ashlock believed the Winterrath Grand Elder had the upper hand over the Ravenborn Grand Elder, which made the current situation more confusing. Within seconds the albino man lay on his back in a molten crater of blue fire with the tip of a black sword pressed against his neck. The Ravenborn Grand Elder gritted his teeth as he attempted to push the blade down to decapitate the man, but the Winterrath Grand Elder held it millimeters from his neck with liquid white flames around his trembling hand, clasping the black blade. You come to my territory, destroy my land, threaten me and try to steal my spirit stone mines. The Ravenborn Grand Elder snarled and spat in his opponent's face. You are 100 years too early to face me, child. His salt and pepper hair seemed to flutter in an intense gale as if it defied gravity as he stood over his foolish opponent without a hint of weakness. The Ravenborn Grand Elder may have his opponent downed, but at what cost? From his vantage point, Ashlock could see the widespread destruction of the town at the base of the Ravenborn Peak. Smoke blanketed the sky as if trying to smother out the screams of the mortals as they ran from ablaze buildings and ruthless cultivators hellbent on eliminating them just because they were under the rule of an opposing family. On the horizon, at the edge of Ashlock's vision range, a snowstorm descended on the land. Football-sized chunks of hail pummeled the town below, smashing buildings and pulverizing people. In the area the storm covered, Ashlock could see dots of blue flames surrounded by white and green flames. The Ravenborn cultivators were putting up a good fight, but they were heavily outnumbered by Winterwrath and Evergreen cultivators that had swarmed the town. It was only now that Ashlock understood the true scale of these families. He could count hundreds, if not thousands, of cultivators battling throughout the town. In fact, was it even a town? From the tiny bit Ashlock could see, he would call it a town, but for all he knew, it could extend for thousands of miles into the distance. Nevertheless, it was total chaos. During their godlike duel, the two Grand Elders had likely killed thousands of innocent bystanders, devastated family homes, and ruined livelihoods. Of the bit of the town Ashlock could see, almost half of it had been reduced to rubble. For example, Ashlock could see a woman on her knees with tears streaming down her face as she cradled a dead child in front of a half-destroyed bakery with a collapsed roof from a block of ice, likely from the ice golem that had been destroyed moments ago. A few feet away was a male corpse with a sword wound through his chest lying face down in a pool of blood, perhaps the woman's partner. And she wasn't the only one. Similar scenes could be seen all around. It was shocking and gruesome. But Ashlock felt nearly nothing. He may have been human once, but that was many years ago. His brain operated on human logic and reasoning but had the dulled emotions of a man-eating tree. It would be ridiculous for Ashlock to take the moral high ground over the cultivators and condemn their actions, especially after he has consumed so many people to fuel his strength. It was a hard truth to swallow, but this was a dog-eat-dog world with a different way of life than the one he had once called home. If he could choose, obviously, he would want no one to die. But that was a useless thought. He was a bystander, a mere observer, until he had the power to change things. Watching the situation from afar reminded Ashlock of the past. He had seen widespread destruction and misery on television after a devastating earthquake in some faraway country. But he had been numb to it, not even giving it a passing thought. But for some reason, the fact the destruction wasn't caused by tectonic shifts outside humans' control, but rather by two angry men fighting over a spirit stone mine angered Ashlock in ways that were hard to describe. It just felt so selfish. As an immortal tree, Ashlock had little care for human life. It was so fickle and would fade away eventually, and a new generation would take the place of the old. But ceaseless death over petty reasons didn't sit right with him. But what could he do? He was a small sapling at the peak of the Chi realm. He paled compared to these demi-gods that walked the same planet as him. It was frustrating to be weak. Ashlock suddenly didn't blame that elderly man that had stolen the seeds for his rude remarks about the cultivators. Evidently, they placed little worth on the mortals of this world and treated them as cattle to be farmed for taxes, so it was no wonder the mortals hoped they would die to the beast tides and leave them to live their mortal lives in peace. The tree's wandering thoughts were interrupted by the mountain trembling, not his mountain but the Ravenborn Peak. The pavilion that felt so close was being consumed by vines of green fire that crushed walls, grabbed people, and snapped them like twigs. The mortal servants were the first to perish, left to fend for themselves by their overlords. Be no calm, however, the weaker cultivators soon joined the servants in death, as few could contend against the attack nor escape as the entire mountain had been overwhelmed and consumed by vines. Only a few cultivators could stay alive, Diana's mother included. She stood defiantly in the courtyard of black trees, slashing at the relentless vines of green flames with her silver sword. She was enraged and screaming at a burly man with a straggly brown beard and fierce eyes that floated overhead. If his wild and buff appearance weren't a dead giveaway, the sickly green flames that poured out of him and into the vines below, alongside the crushing pressure he emitted on the surroundings, gave a clue that he was an evergreen cultivator and a powerful one, likely a Grand Elder. The evergreen Grand Elder didn't even give the angered woman a glance. Instead, his eyes were on the battle between the Winterwrath and Ravenborn Grand Elders. Then, noticing the Winterwrath Grand Elder had lost, he clicked his tongue. Useless bastard. Shooting down the peak, he arrived beside the Ravenborn Grand Elder, and before the old man could react, his fist, glowing with liquid green flames, smashed into his face, sending the Ravenborn Grand Elder tumbling back. I thought you said you could handle the old man. The evergreen Grand Elder sneered at the albino man. Has the Winterwrath family really fallen so far? Perhaps marrying my daughter to your son was a mistake. Ignoring the taunts and standing up, the Winterwrath Grand Elder brushed the dust off his white cloak. His scarlet eyes coldly looked in the direction the Ravenborn Grand Elder had gone flying. Whoever said that old man had lost his edge is a fool. The evergreen Grand Elder snorted and drew his sword. Guess we fight him to the death together. Then a clang rang out, and the dust dissipated in a wave as two eyes of blue fire wrathfully glared at the evergreen Grand Elder. For the first time, the albino man showed fear. He's going supernova. While the evergreen Grand Elder was still locked in a clash of swords, the Winterwrath Grand Elder didn't even attempt to assist his ally and instead dashed away, leaving after images and sonic booms as he went. Ashlock had never heard the term before, but considering they were star core cultivators and blue flames were flowing out of the Ravenborn Grand Elder's eyes, ears, mouth, and arse, he could guess where this was going. The evergreen Grand Elder managed to smack the Ravenborn's sword away, but the man didn't care. Despite being stabbed and slashed, the Ravenborn Grand Elder leapt onto the burly man and clung to him. The Ravenborn Grand Elder was now hard to look at. He was blindingly bright, like a human light bulb. His skin had started melting off, and it was clearly a suicide attack. The evergreen Grand Elder screamed as the intense blue flames charred his skin and set his clothes alight. Then, as the Ravenborn Grand Elder turned to fiery sludge, the burly man broke free from the Ravenborn's grasp. Entomb! The burly man shouted, and the ground trembled as the crater rapidly filled in with earth and hardened into stone. Summoning his sword from his spatial ring, the evergreen Grand Elder took to the skies while chugging a bottle of pills. He seemed to be heading straight up, as high as he could. At this point, the Winterwrath Grand Elder was long gone, very likely out of the range of the attack. Ashlock wondered how the cultivators such as Diana would survive the incoming attack. He saw that the tomb of stone had turned from a dull gray to a molten red, and a second later, it happened. The world went white, and Ashlock's Eye of the Tree God skill was abruptly cancelled. His vision returned to the pleasant courtyard, but the sky was gone. Instead of a pleasant blue with white fluffy clouds floating by, there was a blinding white. In the distance, a column of blue flames transcended into space. Ha! That's weird. The pavilion walls exploded as a superheated wave of air smashed into the mountain. It continued, decimating the courtyard and slamming into Ashlock, causing him to lose consciousness.